Welcome to podcast number 3 of Treign Up and Affirming Our Boys in Manhood. I'm Jeff Smith for Treign Up, and I'm glad you're back with us. We're going to talk about the affirmation process of boys to becoming godly men. In our last podcast, we addressed the primary cause of the boy crisis in America as deprivation of intentional fathers in a nuclear family. We broke that down and talked about the statistics, the trends, and some of the reasons for that. We're still trying to make sure that we understand our problem statement. And so this week we will look at another cause of the boy crisis in America, and that is the bias against boys as students. So we're looking at educational structures. All right, what I want to do is to start off with just some random subjects that are trending about this, that show statistics and verify the idea that boys are failing in schools, at school education systems. So here's one: boys are repeating grades at an alarming rate. Again, various places you can find these statistics. I'm not even sure you need to hear these kinds of things, but these are more recent and they're from various places. We can provide background information for that, but again, I think you know all this. For every 100 girls who repeat kindergarten, 194 boys repeat kindergarten. Boys are 50% more likely to be held back in the 8th grade than 8th grade girls are. So there's a gap in reading and writing. The National Assessment of Education Progress notes the gap between girls and boys. It's most pronounced in 8th grade, with the average 8th grade girl writing at the level of the average 11th grade boy. For every 100 girls 6 to 14 years old who have difficulty doing regular schoolwork, 176 boys have difficulty doing regular schoolwork. 100 to 176 in that category. Nearly twice as many boys as girls have trouble reading, are diagnosed with language disabilities, and are referred to special education classes. Twice as many boys. 41% of children in the United States are not reading at a basic level by 3rd grade, and a majority of them are boys. The next category we're going to look at is labels, medications, and special needs, special education. My wife's a special education teacher and has been for her entire adult life, her entire working career. So I have lots of experience, secondhand at least, in this area. I hear these stories every night. For every 100 girls 3 to 5 years old with a developmental delay, 154 boys are developmentally delayed. Boys make up 2/3 of special education classes. Boys make up 70% of medicated preschoolers and kindergartens. All right, here's another category: homework, test scores, grades. They're crushing boys. In 2007, that's a while ago, but the average GPA of boys taking the SAT was 3.42, while girls have an average of 3.54. Males earn 70% of D's and F's and 40% of A's. That's very telling, I think, a statistic. And boys get into trouble just for being boys. Boys constitute 95% of the kids diagnosed as hyperactive. For every 100 girls suspended from public education or elementary and secondary schools, 215 boys are suspended. That's well over 200%. For every 100 girls expelled from public and elementary and secondary schools, 297 boys are expelled. Suspensions, expulsions. For every 100 12th grade girls who engage in a physical fight on school property, there are 226 boys that get into a fight. Although there are many gifted but undermotivated girls, the actual ratio of non-achieving males to females is 8 to 1. Of high school dropouts, 80% are males. We could go on with that. There's just all kinds of data that you can find everywhere about this situation, this crisis that we're talking about. It has to do with how education is formed and how it shapes the way boys learn, or how it tries to fit them into the way they should learn. But generally, boys learn differently. There's a guy named Michael Gurian, and he writes extensively about this subject and best practices in the field of education. He actually has model schools which apply these boy-friendly strategies and tactics. However, there are fewer than 20 of those such model schools in the country. My son Ben asked me why I thought this was the case. And I think it has to do with the nature of change in general. This kind of change requires a paradigm shift in the way you teach, in your philosophies of teaching. And the implementation of those philosophies would be and are difficult to make. People are generally afraid of change because they're afraid of the unknown. Now, if you add powerful teachers' unions, liberal activists, and government control and bureaucracy and the problems, then greatly magnify as to being able to implement and make these changes. So there's some other resources to talk about this. I'll just include them here. Christina Hoff Sommers' book, The War Against Boys, How Misguided Policies Are Harming Our Young Men. That's a book. And Michael Thompson wrote a book called Raising Cain, Exploring the Inner Life of American Boys. And that's also a good book on the subject of education, if you're interested in exploring that some more. So there is no other noted trend in education that denies the fact that boys are failing. They're falling behind girls in schools. Education is biased towards the girls, and education has been trying to jam these square pegs into round holes to make it work. But as I mentioned earlier, and we know it's true, boys do learn differently. So what are some of the things in our current education forms and structures that work against a boy's learning style? Maybe some of these you can think of off the top of your head. Maybe there's some of them you intuitively know. Let's start with the whole sit down and be quiet. Boys by their nature are rambunctious. You're not allowed to do that. You have to sit down and be quiet, blah, 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 blah. And they enjoy taking risks. Sorry, no risk here. This is a safe space. We'll talk about that later. Boys are more aggressive than girls. Who doesn't know that generally? So we'll have to medicate them. Boys are known to develop at a slower rate than girls, oftentimes resulting in them having diagnosis rates that have doubled, like we talked about before in our statistics, right? So the boys make up the overwhelming majority of these cases. And instead of changing the paradigm of education and considering this nature of young boys and children in general, the education system is forcing them to medicate and address a problem that may not even exist. Schools are essentially diagnosing and medicating kids for not being able to sit still and pay attention, which we know is generally a nature of boys. That would be one. So another factor in education works against a boy's learning style. I call it the jam and cram to take the exam mentality. This is what we been called the mug to jug model of education. Stuff your head with useless information and then regurgitate it on a test and then forget it all the next day. Basically, that's the education model, and that's not a best case scenario. It's not even a good scenario for girls. It doesn't help anyone to learn anything well. So that model doesn't work for boys in particular. Education today, more than ever, is controlled by government. I mean, really, the public school system is the government school system. And government is controlled by politicians. And we know the politicians are influenced by politically motivated interest groups. And many of these politically motivated interest groups that choose to get involved in education, which is a powerful tool to use in shaping future, they're anti-male, or at least they're anti-traditional male, I should say. And that's not going to go well in building environments for boys to be successful, right? So I like to think of the program that they instituted several years ago under Bush, No Child Left Behind. And in fact, it has left all of our children behind, and especially our boys, playing to the lowest common denominator with a cookie cutter philosophy for learning that puts both the teachers and students on edge to achieve standards is a no-win scenario, and it doesn't impact or affect the ability to learn at all. Another one that may have something to do with factors that work against boys' learning styles. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but there's a lack of male role models in schools. I think it was a study in 2018 said only 24% of all K through 12 teachers are men. So because of this, boys can look at education and they can look around them and think it's women's work. And women generally being in charge makes it feel more maternal in nature. A woman's going to be generally more careful and caring in certain ways. And those kind of ideas are going to work against boys building an environment that boys enjoy or are challenged by. One other idea, I'm just throwing these things out here. Boys are over-disciplined at schools, and we talked about this in the statistics. They are disciplined more heavily for the same infractions. A study by the University of California in Los Angeles investigating discrepancies in discipline rates between races and gender found that boys are punished more harshly than their female counterparts. So every 2 boys receiving an out-of-school suspension, only 1 girl is disciplined, even when students' behavior was controlled statistically. So we've talked about that in the statistics above, the trends above. It's they're being told that they can't learn, or they're over disciplined for acting out or doing things that are conducive to the cookie cutter plan that they have in front of them. So just some preliminary insights into the bias against boys in our current education systems and some of these contributing factors as to why boys are disengaging from current models of education. So you got to ask yourself, well, I think we owe it to you to say, so what can we do about that? Wow. Well, it's a big problem, and it's a complex problem, and it's not easily solvable. But if I had to suggest some things for classroom work environments and creating more masculine or formats that were more convenient or suitable to boys, I would say, 1, prepare lesson plans that are designed to play to a boy's learning strengths, like spatial relationships. Boys do good with building things, making things, tactile, kinesthetic learning environments. I got to tell you a story about my 5th grade teacher. His name was John Kuntz. And I don't know if you can remember your teachers from elementary school, but I can remember every one of mine. But this one specifically stands out. He was a man. I believe he was the only man I ever had, definitely in elementary school, but possibly certainly my homeroom teachers through middle school. And he was so good. This space was very big. It was a big space. I remember maybe I was just little, and it made it feel that much bigger. But it was a big open space, and he conducted a lot of hands-on. I remember he built a house or a cave in the back, and that was a special place you could go to do certain things. I can't remember what the activities were in there, but I remember it being kind of like out of cardboard, and it was he was quite crafty and quite good at it with his hands and building things. And so we would build things in that room, and he had stations, a lot of learning stations. That was back in the 1960s. And he built these learning stations where we could move around the space a lot more. He had competitions. This was incredible, and this is again something we're going to talk about here. But he had these competitions where he drew 3 mountains. They were mountains. Okay, first of all, just the imagery of mountains. And everybody had a little boot, and the boot was set at the bottom of the mountain. There was a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced mountain. And throughout the whole school year, you could climb up and down that mountain. You could climb to the top of the mountain, then start again at the bottom of the next mountain. Climb to the top of that mountain, go to the next mountain. Climb all the way to the top, and anybody that made it to the top of the advanced mountain, I don't even know what we got. Maybe we got something. Maybe there was a prize. Maybe it was just the recognition of being at the top of the mountain. That was so powerful to me and so influential that I still remember the 2 kids who finished ahead of me. I remember their names. John Ward and Brenda Baker. They finished ahead of me on the mountain. I was 3rd. And but it was just, I still remember certain things that I had to learn to move my boot up the mountain. There's something about that. There's something about that kind of environment and those ideas that challenge a boy in a way that current models do not. All right, that was one. I kind of went off track there a little bit, but also think interaction, movement, and alertness when teaching boys. You know, when I teach, and I'm a teacher in the church education systems, spiritual formation, I like to have wrapped candies, normally like the kisses. And I like to have them on hand so I can throw them to students that answer questions right. I know you're thinking, oh no, you're going to hit somebody. Absolutely. It's wonderful. I don't know. It works for me. So have the first person raises their hand when you say a certain word for the day. So I'm going to put up a word. And every time I say that word, if you catch me saying that word and you raise your hand, you get a privilege or a treat. It's something that keeps you alert, keeps you engaged. And then I mentioned the competition. Nothing engages a boy, especially a boy. Girls too, but nothing engages a boy better than competition. I talked about the mountains. There's a lot of different ways. I know when I teach, I'll normally break classes into two groups, and we'll learn or reflect on our learning through competition. It's always a winner for me. Did you know that boys' eyes function better in bright natural light? So take the class outside, and you say, not possible, right? I get it. Because of 1,000 reasons, but that's part of the problem, right? Changing learning environments, even if you can do it inside or to another room or change the environment itself, if you can do that regularly, especially if you can go outside, it's an excellent way to keep boys focused. Increase vocational training opportunities. I would love to see our education systems get back to Votex and 4-H and farming and those kind of things. And accept that some boys and girls would do better in the trades, get them started earlier, doing what they are best suited to do. Not everybody is suited to have calculus or geometry, or I know that they all need things, but there are a lot of practical things that aren't taught that they definitely will need. Remember, their learning styles are tactile, they're kinesthetic, they're hands-on, they're experiential. And then the last thing I might add is something simple like relational learning. It's better for boys. This is the whole apprenticeship or mentoring model. If teachers can be mentors, it's a win-win. It's a win-win for learning because boys tend to learn better in a relational environment. So there's some ideas, there's some solutions, hard to implement on the big ship that is public or government-run education. Hopefully someday we'll get into free school choice or vouchers or some other way to reward schools that actually improve a child's learning environment and consequently their education. So I just need to veer off track just a little bit here. If you allow me, I need to talk about Jesus. And obviously, I told you at the beginning that I am going to approach this whole thing from a Judeo-Christian worldview. There's just no hope at all that I can offer outside of that, And Jesus, say what you will, believe or not, he was a master teacher. I mean, his teachings are still with us. And, the whole idea of time hinges on his life and his teachings. And so I think it'd be a missed opportunity not to talk about the greatest communicator the world has ever known and see how he taught boys, because he taught mostly boys. That was the nature of who followed him. Young men, boys, maybe not so much at the elementary level, but certainly when they became old enough to study Torah and learn about the Bible, they were being taught by men. Men were teaching boys. And Jesus' followers were mostly men. And so that was a cultural thing. Still, we can look at it as a model for effective communication to boys. Okay. So you start by saying he was a master teacher. His primary tool that he used was a story. I would love to go into that a lot more. Why story is so powerful, but it is the most powerful form of communication that we know. You can be talking like I'm talking to you now, and blah, 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 and regurgitating and telling and blah, blah, and then go into, I remember what happened to me once when, boom, the mood will automatically change because story has power. I just don't have time to go into that now, but as a storyteller, I understand the reasons for that. There are reasons that works. So we could start by making teachers better storytellers. That would be helpful. Jesus was highly relational. He taught contextually. So out of context, out of situation, something happened. It wasn't concrete. He wasn't teaching this jug to mug philosophy. He was teaching out of what happened. It was very much more the idea of apprentices or disciples, we call them. The idea of cramming for an exam, it would have been completely foreign and impractical in those days, and it would not be the way Jesus would teach anyway, because it would be ineffective, and he was an effectual teacher. You'd never hear him say, "Get out your pens and pencils and let's start writing. Let's see what you learned today." So he would teach them out of these teachable moments. I love the story of Jesus walking on the water. I forget, it's Matthew 13, I think, when Peter reaches out. Peter walks on the water to meet Jesus, and he falls into the water. We know how that story goes, and blah, 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 blah. That was a teaching moment. That was a teachable moment set up by Jesus. It was class in session. That's the way he taught, because that ties into the passages before, and I may be one chapter off, but it'd be Matthew 12 or Matthew 13. Whatever happened before that, which was the feeding of the 5,000. He was concerned about something his disciples misunderstood about faith. So he put them into a classroom situation where they would learn. And when you have a situation when you're on a raging sea and the storm is going to engulf your little boat and you have no hope except for Jesus, you cry out, and when he shows up, you say, "A ghost!" Great story. But it was a teaching moment, and that's the way Jesus taught. The only sermon that you can find, basically, that I know of generally in the Bible is the Sermon on the Mount, recorded in Matthew 5 and 6. And everything else was Jesus teaching out of context and telling stories, these parables. So let me tell you a story. When I was a children's pastor, the senior pastor at that church gave me my first assignment to fix the midweek programming. It was failing and it wasn't working. And he said, "Get in there and fix that." So I went to an apprenticeship model. I won't tell you what we were doing because it's still out there. And what I did is I recruited talented people, and not for their biblical knowledge, but I brought them in for doing what they were good at doing: cooking, chess, fishing, building birdhouses, repairing motors, writing, knitting, playing games. I called it Children's Ministry University, CMU, and we designed a whole midweek program like college courses. So we would have new faculty or new people come in every semester to teach a slate of classes that were interesting to the kids. And of course, if you're from a church denomination like that, you're going to think, "Oh no, where's the Bible lesson? Oh, heresy." That's kind of what I got. So I had to work on selling the idea. But what we're talking about is all things boys and education, to include how we look at spiritual formation of boys. The system that they were using, which was a school model, was broken. Kids didn't appeal to them. So doing the same thing and expecting different results is like the definition of insanity. Change, however, is hard. You know that. There's a paradigm shift. And so I started by teaching my teachers, or in trying to influence my teachers to be more relational and storytellers like Jesus. It really starts with a philosophical question. Do you want to reach the boys? And by the way, Dobson, Peterson, Barna, Farrell, all those who write about this subject would say, if you get the boys, you get the girls. And if you get the children, you get the adults. And that's the model for growing your church. So win, win, win. So anyway, I built this program. I did acquiesce to some degree, actually not, but so that I can have a core scriptural component. I built in scripture memory. I did a very short devotion that I wrote each week, and a mission project that each class had to do by the end of the semester. But the ministry was building relationships. Ministry is relationship, relationship, relationship. I was doing that by giving these people who did things well a mentoring platform. And at the end of each semester, we would have recitals and showcases and art galleries and video presentations of their work. We would show the fish that we cooked and ate from the fishing, and then the testimonies. And the whole thing just took off. It was an apprenticeship model, and it worked very well. I also have a couple of resources that I might recommend to you. Do I get the right side? This is my book called Riveting. That's an acronym, RIVET, Making Your Message Stick. And this is some of the practical ideas that I've used, that I learned. I put them in, this is my acronym that I put together, and has to do with effectual teaching models. It has to do with engagement, because the purpose of effectual teaching is engagement. Think about that for a second. they're not engaged, they're not learning. If they're not engaged, they're not, they can't, they're not even getting the information or what you're trying to teach them. All right, so I want to talk a little bit as we start getting ready to close here, turn the corner to close out here about this philosophy, because we're still really very much into the conceptual, the ideas behind what we're trying to get to, which is really practical and hands-on ideas and programs and curriculum and work that we can give you to do. So to support all of this. Dallas Willard, one of my absolutely favorite teachers, has a model that he calls VIM. VIM, V-I-M, stands for Vision, Intention, and Means. And it is generally the way we do things. You have to implement things, ideas that they have to have. You start with vision, because the Bible says without a vision, the people perish. It's true of everything. You got to have a vision. Again, going back to our vision, do you want to engage the boys? Do you have, is it important for you to engage the boys? That would be your vision. And why? So you're trying to engage the boys, affirming them in manhood. Does it matter? Does the spiritual formation of boys matter if you're a children's pastor or a leader in a church? If you're a Sunday school teacher, or I hate that word, Sunday school teacher, by the way, Sunday school teacher, works against the whole paradigm. So if you have the vision, then you can implement the intention. You'll have the intention. It drives your purpose, and the means will follow suit. So I really want to talk about the vision. All things start with that. So again, going back to my days as the children's pastor of that church, this was hugely important to me. It was definitely always on my radar. I saw this need long ago. I've given you my background story. You know why this high idea matters, but it's been very much on my front burner for a very long time. So when I became a children's pastor, this was part of my philosophy. How do I engage the boys? So I want to show you how this worked. The branding, how vision worked its way into brand. Branding is vision. It's your logo, your marketing slogan, your campaign, your images, your pictures, your environments. It's those kind of things that branding ideas became very important because it says something about who you are. Anybody that's in marketing, anybody that's in sales knows this. Okay, so what would be my pitch to attract the boys when I got there? Okay, so when I came to the church, the walls, they were lined with, wait for it, pastels. And beautiful pastel drawings of deer drinking water. It was so soothing and calm. Oh! Yeah, so that had to go. I created this logo with mountains, and the message that I wanted to create in the logo was follow me, which is the call of Jesus. Jesus only had two calls. Actually, he only had one. The only other one you hear in scripture besides follow me is come and see. Both of them reek with adventure. That is the nature of the call that Jesus sends forth. It's adventure. Follow me. Eldridge, I think, wrote the book. I could be wrong about that. Eldridge, Following the Wild Goose. You might want to check on that. But the book's called Following the Wild Goose. That's the nature of spiritual things. You just never know. And the only safe space you're ever going to find is the center of God's will. Everything else is like, wow. So I created a logo with mountains and this message, and it reeked adventure and showed a path leading up into the highest hills with the sun coming up over. And it just said, who wants to go with me? The colors, all the colors, patterns, schemes were changed to primary bold colors. And the walls, I lined the walls with images of great men and women of valor and faith. Mighty men, mighty women that did things in the kingdom that were extraordinary. We called it the peaks because there was something about that idea, that image that was masculine. I know that's a bit of an enigma and it may sound sexist, but that feels strong to me. Part of it was because I was also trying to fit my branding into the branding of the church, what had Mount in the name. So Mount and the peaks. Okay. Anyway, that kind of stuff just jazzes me. And one of these things I teach about this subject, and from there we talk about environments and programming, curriculum, and special events. But let me just show you another example of how I tie this idea through, how I thread the needle with everything that I'm thinking about when I was developing my ministry philosophy and programming and special events and blah, 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 blah. So Vacation Bible School. I do my own Vacation Bible School. Fam Jam or something else. Again, Vacation Bible School, the idea of school, I want it out. I want it out because of this misnomer that school has with boys. So even that term. Anyway, I write my own every year. I consider a masculine theme because it's my ministry philosophy and my burden for the boys. And, if I can get the boys, I can get the girls. I've experienced this over and over and over and over again. So I had this idea for a food theme. I think it's Psalms 34:8, taste and see that the Lord is good. That's what I wanted to use. And I'm thinking about a cooking show because my name is Jeff, and I'm thinking Chef Jeff would be a great mascot figure. I could do a lot with him, but you can't sell a cooking show as your Vacation Bible School, or you can't sell a cooking show to boys. It just. So I'm thinking about that. I really felt like that was the idea. That was the scripture I needed to go to. I had my days worked out, but I couldn't get the title. I couldn't get the imagery. And then it came to me one day. Food fight. Got it. Food fight. That is a masculine brand. Food fight. I got my cooking show too. Chef Jeff it worked so well. And of course, the end of the week activity was a brilliant food fight, which was positively disgusting. Loved it. Not enough time to discuss the other two ideas associated with vision. The other two are intention and means, but they take time. They take resources, time being a resource, and influence. But if you see the need and it's part of your vision, then you'll have the vigor and you'll have what you need to make the climb. Okay. So we as we close here, I will say we do know that boys are leaving churches, men are leaving churches, still in this education model. I'm thinking, why is that? And maybe here's some reasons. They might sound like they parallel the educational structure a little bit. Think about these. These are me just randomly putting some ideas together, but basically parents are checking out of organized religion. That's the stat that is universally understood. That is a trend that's actually happening. People are checking out of organized religion. Has anybody noticed that Baptist and Presbyterian and Methodist and all the other religious denominations are changing their church names? You don't see anybody starting a new church and calling it First Baptist or Second Baptist or Fourth Baptist. They all have independent names, New Community, Brightpoint, Star Search, whatever. Nobody is calling themselves by denominational names. It's because people are disenchanted with organized religion and they're leaving. And COVID didn't help, right? George Barna wrote a book called Revolution. I think it was about the turn of the century somewhere. And he warned us that this would happen. People were eventually going to move to building their own faith models to suit their preferences and their schedules. It's like have it your way, that kind of thing. It's happening. Another point might be peer pressure. I don't know why this is. Well, I do know why this is. It's because matters of faith in a post-Christian culture are seen as weak and old-fashioned, and they definitely don't seem cool. I mean, the cool kids and that whole thing. So peer pressure is works against friends have a great sway. Again, Barna's book, Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions, had peer pressure as one of the top 10 influences of iconic influences of kids and culture, way ahead of, one ahead of parents and way ahead of the church. So peer, what the friends think is important. There's a lot to be said about friends. All right, another one is if the church isn't a priority, it's easy to find something to take its place, and you are up against sports, which is the god of our culture. Everybody knows this. Youth sporting events started moving into the Sundays, and now it's a fight. It's a fight to win back kids. Parents have to make decisions. They choose because their child is certainly going to be one of the 0.04% that get a baseball scholarship. Yeah, 100% of your kids are going to have to give an account to Jesus when they die. 100%. You have a better chance of it by getting them into church and saving them. So if it's not a priority, they'll find something else to take its place. That's another reason they're leaving. The church messaging has been convoluted by trying to appeal the consumer-driven culture. This is such a thing. We've lost our way. I feel like the church is an enigma. The Western culture church is an enigma. Maybe it's been too easy. COVID totally revealed our soft underbelly. Totally revealed. I mean, the government said shut down, even though the laws clearly are in our favor, regardless of the executive orders and things that were put out. The Constitution protects that right for us to gather as a people. And we just laid it down. We just laid it down. We were afraid to fight. I think it just shows the nature of churches in general and how really strongly we're holding on to our conviction. So that whole idea, since it doesn't look any different from the world, because people in churches who are bringing in the money and are keeping the doors open and the air conditioner on, they want certain things, and they're not going to stay if they don't get certain things. And that mentality is all quite backwards. So churches begin to appear very much like the world, and it holds no allure as an alternative for generations looking for hope. There was nothing, this is another point altogether. There was nothing about the message of Jesus, nothing that was safe. Okay? The idea of safe spaces is laughable to Jesus. Now, I will say this God-bathed world is a perfectly safe place for you to be. But we all know that where we have gone with this idea of safety and safe spaces, especially in a maternal environment like elementary schools, that has so weakened and softened the playing field where the boys are. There's nothing safe about it. Let me tell you a story. Wait a minute, let me finish that idea. As hard as this is for your noble sensibilities to understand, there is nothing appealing to the idea of safe spaces for boys. So we'll talk about that later. Risk is necessary for a boy's maturation to manhood. It's been that way in every culture for all time. There has to be some sense of risk involved in a boy's becoming a godly man, or the affirmation process that supports that. So a couple more. Motivation. What motivation do boys have to be there other than we know their salvation, which is the most important thing of all? It's the most important thing of all, their salvation. But if there's no risk involved in the process, then the necessity to learn is diminished. Let me make an allegory here. When I was in airborne school, by the way, I used to be afraid of heights, right? But I'm in airborne school and I jump out of a plane. I remember before I did that, learning how to land and being very intent when the teacher was teaching us to learn how to land properly when we fell out of the sky with a parachute and landed on the ground. Basically, I wanted to get that right because I didn't want to fall out of a plane and then break my leg on the landing, right? Survival is a very strong motivator. Here's another point. Once I taught a series in my kids' church on courage. And I challenged the kids at the church to come to at least 5 of the 6 sessions. And if they did, they would be invited to join us for a day trip to a high ropes course, where we would put the things we learned about courage into practice. And I kept putting these images and showing them videos of this high rope course. And there was a sense of, oh, awesome, because it wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't at all. and there were levels, and the higher levels were actually very hard. But I put something in front of them, a vision, so that paying attention and coming and learning would matter. And there was an interest out of necessity to learn. So we had great attendance for that series and a great response at the high ropes course. That was so successful. And lastly, I would say boys want to be challenged. All right. Generally, a boy wants to know that he has what it takes. There, let me say it again. A boy wants to know he has what it takes. Girls want to know that they're lovable. Boys want to know that they have what it takes. They need to be challenged. How can that be if you never cause them to dig deeply? Since most curriculum for churches are boxed, they are gender neutral and appeal to the lowest common denominator. When I say boxed, I mean they're written at some high level by educators that are thinking only about inclusivity and definitely not thinking about boys in general. You aim so low that no one feels left out behind that you basically leave the boys out. It's like the participation trophies given to the last place sports teams. I think about that. Is that the nature of the call of God to fight the good fight and finish the race? Is that what Paul described when he talked about the strict training and beating his body so that he would not be disqualified for the prize? I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, there you have it. In this podcast, we looked at a bunch of things. The second reason for the boy crisis in America, we believe it's a biased education structure in our schools and our churches. You might be able to think of some other education models that are in the same boat. So we'll leave that behind. Next week, we'll look at the third and final reason that we believe boys are lost in today's culture, and that is the distortion and denial around biblical manhood, leading to the demonization of masculinity. Oh, those toxic males. Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm Jeff Smith. I'm with Treign Up, and we're here to help you affirm boys in manhood.